To welcome W. Clement Stone, businessman, speaker, author, philanthropist, and really the list just goes on, but perhaps the best way that people identify you is Mr. PMA. Does that, do you like to be identified
as PMA? Absolutely, because the very fact that a person mentions it indicates that they are somewhat involved with positive mental attitude. Mm-hmm. And the more they mention it, the better it is subconsciously for them, and the better it is for those who hear them.
I've heard you refer to PMA as, I believe you feel it is a major discovery you made in your life, and a very important one.
Well, the major discovery that I made, which I call my great discovery in the last few years, are two principles. Mm-hmm. One, how to recognize, relate, assimilate, and apply principles from what you see, hear, read, think, and experience, and from other disciplines so as to achieve any goal whatsoever. Now, what does that mean? That means achieving the impossible, provided the goal or the method of achieving it doesn't violate universal law, the law of God and the rights of your fellow men. So I train persons to set very, very high impossible goals and how to achieve them. And that is done through repetition, 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 by keeping one's mind on the goal. You see, the computer was designed as to function similar to the function of the brain of an individual, their human computer. However, with the electronic computer, when it's all set, you can work out problems with accuracy in a short space of time, but you'll never get out of that computer, the electronic computer, more than you took the time to put into it. Mm-hmm. With the human computer, it's endless, and that is handled through repetition, 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 repetition. Mm-hmm. A child, for example, is taught to walk. The first step they may fall, but through repetition, 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 the child walks, runs, etc. And so it is with everything else.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about a positive mental attitude and how important it is for a person to have it, why do you suppose more people don't have it or don't realize the importance of it?
Well, in the first place, you see, throughout the history of education, you could get a diploma at any elementary school or high school merely by using your memory. Cram for an exam and get 100. You get a degree at any university in the behavioral sciences or at any seminary by merely using your memory. And a person all of his lifetime may never figuratively have the true riches of life and the wealth of the world in the palm of his hands. And so that's the field I'm in, training persons on every continent, because everyone has that human computer, a brain and nervous system, but they're never taught how to use it. So it makes no difference whether I'm in Africa, Asia, or wherever I am, or wherever I have an instructor. They're taught how to use that human computer to achieve any goal. It makes no difference what it is, provided, again, it doesn't violate universal law.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about the first important discovery that you made is what might be called the R2A2, or the recognize,
relate, assimilate. R2A2. You recognize something, you relate it to yourself, assimilate it, and then you apply it.
And you're saying that is a different educational process for a person's mind than what the typical person is programmed through. And that's what makes it different.
And they achieve that by having their mind on a goal. The important thing is to aim for a goal. And when you go to church or when you're in conversation or if you read something, because you have your mind on that big, impossible goal in the minds of others, you will be alerted to something that might help you achieve it.
Mm-hmm. Then you say the next step is repetition, repetition, repetition.
That's right. Whether it's walking or whether it's developing a technique in sports or whether it's trying to solve a problem, the subconscious will come up with the answer, because the subconscious operates 24 hours a day. If it weren't for the unconscious, your heart wouldn't be beating, et cetera, et cetera.
Do you find that a lot of people don't have an adequate understanding and appreciation for the subconscious and its importance?
Definitely so. If they really did, they'd realize how important it is to think of good thoughts, to think in terms of the good they want to do, et cetera, to think of those large impossible goals that they may think are impossible, but that are possible provided they don't violate universal law.
So as a result, do some people live their entire life and never really take advantage of the power of the subconscious in their life?
Well, everyone does use the subconscious to some degree, but they may not set that computer for high achievement. Many persons have the potential to achieve phenomenal success. They already have it, but they won't pay the price to engage in tapping the subconscious through proper study and repetition.
Mm-hmm. Your own personal career is a fascinating story, starting selling papers at what, age 6?
At age 6.
And then by the time you're age 20, you have your own insurance business?
13, had my own newsstand. At age 16, started selling insurance. At age 20, established my own insurance agency in Chicago.
To what do you attribute the discovery of PMA and all of these other things in your life, as opposed to the alternative, which you've described that most people
Well, actually, having been born in poverty, and my father died when I was very young, and my mother working, and my uncle and aunt with whom we lived working, I was pretty much on myself, so by myself, a latchkey kid, so to speak. So I had to think for myself. And fortunately, my mother, by virtue of the fact that I had some problems, prayed for guidance, and sent me to a parochial school for 2 years, after which time I was ready and she was ready. She then had her own dressmaking establishment, and I went to a public school and pretty much thought for myself.
Mm-hmm. As you began to employ other people and have them work for you, the way I understand the story is that you developed a very specific technique in sales. You didn't leave very much to accident.
Yes, I developed a system of cold canvassing, calling on banks, department stores, large offices, as well as stores and office buildings, cold canvas, selling accident insurance. And I developed a system where it is absolutely impossible to fail if the system is used as it's conceived to be, the entire system. And it makes no difference, because it's based on the functioning of the human mind, it makes no difference whether we're in London or whether we're in Tokyo or whether we're in Berlin or whether we're right here in Dallas or wherever we might be.
Mm-hmm. Is there any danger that when you're training someone, the techniques that you have learned and incorporated in a very personal way into your life, that they only come across with the superficial techniques, but they haven't really incorporated into their personality and made it real?
Not the way I train them, because I train them as if I would train an actor, an actress, an exact sales talk, just as you might with a play. The proper emphasis, hesitation, when to use humor, how to leave, every emotion. I train just like I train an actor and or actress, and it's impossible to fail if they use the system as it's conceived to be.
But I think when some people hear that, they may be reminded of the telephone calls they sometimes get, for example, from a salesperson over the phone who is obviously reading a scripted sales talk, and they get the feeling that this person is controlled by that scripted sales talk as opposed to really responding.
No, that's not true, because we train them as an actor. If you see a great play, you'll know whether the actor is really living the part. I go out with the salesman in the beginning and also check later. For example, here is a young chap, 19, red-headed kid that was selling, and I was standing beside him, and this lady said, "Boy, isn't he terrific? What a salesman." She didn't know that I had trained him with those exact words, with exactly how to use the directional force of the eyes, the pen, et cetera, how to close. When you see a great play by a great artist, it never occurs to you someone else wrote the lines.
Mm-hmm. So they really have incorporated it into being a very real thing for them.
That's right.
From the standpoint of...
the burden of teaching is upon the one who wants to teach. The burden of learning is upon the one who wants to learn. I want to teach, therefore I evaluate the results that I get.
From the standpoint of those people you would teach, let's say in an interview process or a selective process for hiring, are there any particular things you look for in a person that you might want to have go to work for you? Yes.
Character is number one. And I have a form, AVA, Activity Vector Analysis, which is as close to 100% as you'll ever get in analyzing a person. Walter Clark, many years ago, was a graduate engineer and had a degree in psychology. When he was working for himself as a consultant in New York, he was concerned because at Macy's and other places there's so much psychosomatic illnesses, so much absenteeism, and he felt that as an engineer, if something was wrong with a piece of machinery, he could fix it. So he tried to develop a system that would handle this matter of psychosomatic illnesses, etc., and developed AVA, Activity Vector Analysis. Well, I took the course many years ago, and to make a long story short, it's as close to evaluation as 100% as you'll ever get. Walter Clark passed away and I bought the company. So with me and those people we train, we know exactly how a person thinks. The essence of the program is to draw our diagrams. The whole thing only takes 20 minutes to give a report and all. And we have a diagram of the job. If not, we'll make a diagram of the job. And when the two coincide or are similar, then a person's doing what comes naturally, and it's no longer work, it's fun. Let's say for cold canvassing, which is contrary to a person's nature, we want someone with a high activity level, someone who will stick up for his own ideas but not be rigid, someone that when he makes a decision, it'll be in proper balance between reason and emotion. For a salesman, I want them a little bit towards the emotional side. For a manager, I want them a little bit towards the reason side. So we train men and women who cold canvas, who never sold anything, and who, when they start, say they could never sell anything. That's where we teach them the PMA concepts. And young people, men and women, make fantastic salaries.
I've heard a lot of people back away from the term salesman. They feel uncomfortable with it for some reason, and yet I've read that of all the things that might be used to refer to yourself, executive, philanthropist, author, writer, the term you prefer more than anything else is salesman.
That's right. It's the salespersons in this country that made America great, our sales and marketing methods. The truth of the matter is everyone, in the true sense, is a salesperson. A parent with a child, or even a kid that can't even speak. If it is hungry or wants the diaper changed, it yells out and the mother, bingo, rushes and takes care of it. Everyone is convincing someone of an idea or forcing them to action.
We need to take a break for just a minute. We'll come back and continue to visit. We're talking today with W. Clement Stone.
I'm Bob Edwards.
I'm Barbara Hochtert. This is NPR's Morning Edition.
This is Noah Adams.
And I'm Susan Stamberg. Every day on All Things Considered, we bring you the human stories behind the headlines.
And we take you into the minds of thoughtful people.
Well, look who's coming through that door. I think we met somewhere before.
This is American Public Radio.
We're back on campus and continuing to visit with W. Clement Stone. Another dimension of your involvement has been the magazine Success, and I believe you were involved in the founding of it, served as editor of it, and owner of it.
That's right, and Og Mandino was on my staff for a period of years. We're now merged with Hell Publications, and we're on newsstand all over the nation, and as well as have the magazine Working Women. The magazine is really an inspirational magazine. This month's issue, for example, we have a picture of the President Reagan, and an article by President Reagan. And I have a humorous article about a stogie, a cigar.
The word success, I think, might mean different things to different people. How do you define success?
Well, success in the true sense is achieving a predetermined goal. However, the word success to many persons means financial. To me, success means achieving any goal whatsoever that doesn't violate universal law, the law of God, and the rights of your fellow man, so that you can be successful in acquiring wealth if you wish, successful in raising children, successful in sharing with the world the blessings the good Lord has given to you. You can be successful and have a successful life in many things. The important thing is that you share with others the blessings that you've been fortunate enough to receive.
But I like that definition because it allows for people to understand success in a context that goes beyond just monetary success, doesn't it? One of the things I've heard you say is that there are two very important powers that are available to all of us, the power to choose and the power of prayer. Would you elaborate a little bit on
yes,
how
there are
those
really
powers...
four powers: the power to choose, the power of prayer, if one knows how to pray, and that's to be specific. And years ago I decided that giving prayers of thanks wasn't good enough unless you proved your thanks, other than by just words and by sharing the blessings the good Lord has given to you. And the other is the power to engage in creative thinking time, and the next one is the power to act. Action is the key word. Many people do a lot of thinking, but they don't really get into action. They don't motivate themselves. And that's because they weren't taught at school how to motivate themselves. That's being changed now. I predict that only a few years there'll be very few institutions that won't be training the professors, the clergymen, the teachers in the art of motivation with PMA, so they in turn can train their parishioners or their students.
When you talk about the power to choose, are you suggesting that some of us don't avail ourselves of that power and
That's
just
right.
become victims instead?
That's right. You see, a person can choose, if they wish, to set high goals, impossible goals that do not violate universal laws, etc., and then to do something about it. That's where the individual must choose to motivate himself. And the secret is to keep the goal before him and to repeat and repeat daily.
Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of motivation, do you believe it's possible for one person to motivate another person, or do you believe each person has to motivate himself or herself?
Well, let's put it in this form. One person can motivate another person through the use of suggestion. However, as Dr. Emil Coué pointed out so many years ago, it isn't the words of the one saying them, but it's the reaction of the individual himself to those words, so that he really motivates himself. But it's like pushing a button to turn on the light. It isn't the push that does it, it's when two things connect that really do it. So that a person can motivate himself, or he can be motivated by others. In my case, I use strong suggestion, whether I'm working in penal institutions where we've reduced recidivism down to 15%. At the time we were evaluated in the Chicago area, for every 100 men released, 87 came back. On a 15% recidivism rate, 85 stay out.
When you talk about goal setting, do you find that most people in general do have a well-developed system for goal setting, or are a lot of people still uncertain or unclear about how to set goals?
Everyone has goals in the broad sense. They go to work, for example, and they come home and they eat and they sleep. But not everyone has set high goals that they could set, or unfortunately, because of the school systems of the past, they weren't taught the art of motivation so that they could set higher and higher goals. It's impossible for anyone to conceive how far up is, except the limitation they put in their own minds. So we get persons to aim higher and higher and higher, regardless of how high they go. There's always a higher plateau.
One of the things that I find interesting about your concepts and the thing that you talk about is this idea of 30 minutes of creative thinking time a day. It seems that in the very busy kind of world that people live in today, a lot of people feel pressure to keep their hours filled with all of the busy things they need to be doing, as opposed to isolating that and reserving and preserving that 30-minute time.
Yes, a person does really what he wants to do. The value of engaging in a half an hour each day of creative thinking time, where an individual will take a room where he won't be disturbed, sit at a desk or table, have plenty of light, have a notepad before him. The heading can be how I can achieve any goal that doesn't violate universal law, the law of God and rights of my fellow men. The next line can be the big goal, the impossible goal in the minds of others. And he can have other goals, and just sit and concentrate. Put a line down the center of the pad. Ideas will occur that may work. Jot in the right-hand column. Ideas may occur that are negative, like I don't have the money, I don't have the experience. Put in the left-hand column. Those are goals to be overcome. And through repetition, 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 the subconscious will come up with the answer, because that's how that human computer works, is through repetition, repetition, repetition. Many persons, for example, worry, and they get exactly what they worry about, because that's the way the computer operates.
And that's a form of repetition, isn't
That's
it?
right.
Worry
Right.
would be a form of... In the repetition, I have read on several instances where you have very specific statements that you suggest a person repeat this statement, say 50 times a day to themselves, or things like that. Would you elaborate on the value of doing that?
Yes, in my case, I repeat. Someone asks, I do it at all times. Someone asks me how I feel. I say, I feel healthy. I feel happy. I feel terrific. Or I might say, I'm riding a persistent, continuous, permanent wave of good fortune. Where so many people will tell about their aches and pains, who in the world is interested? Besides the harm it does them, the person who does that, because it's through repetition that the subconscious operates, and they're going to have more problems.
Mm-hmm. So in one case, for example, I believe I read where you said it would be good if a person repeated the golden rule to themselves.
Absolutely. And the 10 Commandments, however, what we do in training the clergy and Sunday school teachers is not only to memorize, but the meaning of the words. For example, millions say the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And millions are saying, Lord, you don't have to forgive me. I hate that person over there. I'm going to get even with them. And that person over there, that gal, she's saying things about our family that aren't true. I'm going to get even with her. So, Lord, do as I do. Well, that's not the meaning. So we're training the clergy to train the parishioners the meaning of the words. Also, we're training the clergy that when they give a sermon, by golly, they should give a sermon that affects the lives of the parishioners so that something happens because they're there. For example, with those who are listening, they can ask themselves a question. If they've heard a great sermon and they shook hands with the priest or minister or rabbi as they went out, and they told how wonderful that sermon was, how inspired they were, if the following week they'd shake hands with the clergyman, and the clergyman held the person's hand, looked him in the eye, and said, I'm working for the Lord. I'm working for God. I want to help people and you can help me, so be truthful. How did that sermon change your thinking? Be specific. Did you do something kind or thoughtful or good that you wouldn't have done because of the sermon? Or did you refrain from doing something unkind, mean, a fit of anger, or even sinful because of that sermon? What do you suppose the answer would be? I know what the answer would be. They weren't trained how to recognize, relate, assimilate, and apply principles. So we train the clergymen. Results are what count, and you should evaluate your sermon by what happens in changing the lives of these people according to the gospel you're trying to teach them, rather than just hearing you, is to get into action and apply the principles. And one of the principles is that you don't get in life always what you expect unless you engage in self-inspection. So it pays to check on your congregation to see whether they really are living up to the principles you were supposed to teach them.
Mm-hmm. From a standpoint of parents and their children, do you have any guidelines or suggestions to them about how they can get a child, their sons or daughters, to appreciate and incorporate this R2A2 approach?
Yes, absolutely. They should obviously go to the library or buy a book on self-help, Think and Grow Rich, Success with a Positive Mental Attitude, The Success System Never Fails. But for any reason they don't care to buy books or read books, they should operate on good finding in helping the child rather than fault find or criticism. As soon as you criticize a person, they're on edge. They're going to fight back. But through fault finding, and great teachers, what they do is help kids through good finding. Melva Collins, for example, in Chicago, the teacher that's has become world famous. Some kid does something, she put her loving arms around him and talk about some of the good things, and then say, now you don't want to do this again, and so forth, rather than criticize. As soon as you criticize a person, regardless who that person is, they're on edge. You don't do that in motivation, because the criticism will cause a negative reaction.
Then do you incorporate that same approach as a manager or a businessman to an employee?
Definitely. What we do is to show them. We don't find fault with them. We first point out, look, you're doing a good job here, but here's how you might improve here. Let me show you.
Would you ever, in your experience, have to fire a person or terminate an employee?
It would only be for a sex crime.
Not for a failure to perform a certain task.
Or even if they committed some other crime that wasn't a sex crime, I would try to help them for several reasons. One is to help the individual, also to prove my ability and motivation to do it. Look, I work in prisons, and at the time we were evaluated in Chicago, for every 100 men released, 87 came back. Where we had instructors, the recidivism rate was 15%, 18% on a 15% recidivism rate. It means 85 stay out. Mm-hmm. So that's how you evaluate.
Mm-hmm. From the standpoint of, we're almost out of time, but you started at a very early age, age 6. You're still going strong at anyone, I suppose you don't mind your age being
No,
mentioned.
I was born on May 4th, 1902, so under new math, that makes me 36.
And you continue to act and
I expect to live to be between 104 years and 110, and if you're around, why, you'll see that it's achieved.
I'll look forward to sending you a birthday card. Thank you for being with us. I'm sorry we're already out of time. It's been a very delightful visit.
It's been inspiring being with you.
And thank you for being with us on campus with W. Clement Stone.